All right. Today, we are very happy to welcome Kathleen Aziz, a Principal Transportation Planner at the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. She is the current WTS Sacramento Vice President and also serves as the lead staff for the new Capital Area Region Tolling Authority, otherwise known as CARTA. She is leading CARTA's toll policy work to deliver the Sacramento region's first express lane on Interstate 80 between Davis and West Sacramento. I'd like to welcome Kathleen to the podium, and she will take it from here for the rest of today's presentation. So welcome, Kathleen.
Thanks, everyone. Long-time lunch eater, first-time lunch talker. So very, very pleased to be here with many of you who I know and happy to see so many new faces in the room as well. This presentation is going to cover a lot of ground in various different areas, so I hope it'll be a good starter for some rich Q&A towards the end here. So big picture, as Amanda mentioned, we're delivering our first express lane project in this region. This is a partnership between CARTA, the Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority, and Caltrans District 3. So I'll talk a bit about the bigger context of tolling in this region, the long-range vision, some details about the Yolo 80 project, and then for all of you who I hope will be great toll-paying customers in a couple of years, what you can expect on how to use the lane. So a bit of Tolling 101. I know we have a diverse kind of multimodal, multidisciplinary group here. So if this is your first presentation on tolling, we'll cover some ground on how it works. That bigger picture from SACOG, Yolo 80 managed lanes, and then of course some of the toll policy pieces. Starting with Tolling 101. So I like to have very simple slides like this because I like to irritate the traffic engineers, but basically the reason that we toll is because we want to reduce congestion and we want to increase revenue, right? Especially in a growing region like Sacramento, our highways are constrained, generally speaking. We don't have unlimited right-of-way to keep widening and widening. There's also a lot of consequences to continuing to widen, and then we understand over time the effectiveness of a new lane kind of diminishes, right? I'll let you talk to the Fair and Piers folks about that if you're interested. And so what pricing a facility does is helps us manage our existing capacity. So if you change how much it costs in real time for someone to take a trip, they'll change their decision-making on whether or not they're going to take that trip, or they'll move it earlier, or they'll put more people in their car, and that helps us have better throughput on our existing facilities. Of course, when you charge people for something, you also make money by that process. And so some facilities generate more revenue than others, but at a minimum, right, you're at least generating the revenue to cover your operations and basic maintenance. And so we know we have this giant backlog of maintenance, particularly on our local roads in this region. But generally speaking, starting to price our facilities helps us address that, right? And then in the better cases where you have a really productive facility, you can generate excess revenue to reinvest in bus service or bike trails or expansions of the toll system or whatever you want, really. There is a big network of existing toll facilities in California. So these are all of the facilities you may use. You'll notice this sort of spider graphic has the blue bubbles. Those are back offices. So they're basically all kind of networked together to the same customer service hub. I'll talk a bit about what a back office is in a couple of slides. And so you'll see each of the gray, green, depending if you're at home, boxes are individual facilities. So this includes express lanes, but also toll bridges and full toll roads, which we have in Southern California, and how they kind of link up together. So this is the family that CARTA and our first express lane in Sacramento will be joining. In California, state law requires interoperability, which means that if you have an account with any of these blue bubbles, you're able to use any of the green and gray bubbles throughout the whole state seamlessly. So we have kind of behind the curtain magic that happens to make sure that we share revenues and transactions between each other's customers. What that should mean to you is that if you're an existing Bay Area customer and you have a fast track, you use their express lanes or you use their bridges, you'll be able to use our express lane here in Sacramento with absolutely no problems. Tolling, like any type of infrastructure, is very complicated, right? But if we take it 10,000 foot to bring everybody along here, there's really two main parts to a toll system. There's the roadside system and there's the back office system. So the roadside system is really tasked with detecting vehicles and then producing some kind of identifying information for that vehicle. So I saw a car at 2 p.m. and I either captured transponder in that car and I know the VIN number of that transponder, or I took a picture of the license plate and I know the license plate that went with that car. That's what the roadside system does. Then it packages up that information into what's called a transaction or a trip. And then it transmits that information to the back office, who is really the like money part of the operation. So that back office says, okay, I looked at that license plate. I know that license plate is Celia McAdam. She got charged a $2 toll. And so I'm going to charge that to her account. She has a paying credit card already on the account. Toll's paid. Or her credit card's expired. So now we have to send her a love letter in the mail, politely asking her to pay her toll. So this is, generally speaking, all of the parts that CARTA is working on getting together in this region, right? So Caltrans is delivering the civil project, creating the lane, building the infrastructure to support this system, and then CARTA is tasked with getting all these pieces put in place to operate Yolo 80. Visually speaking, the roadside system is the part you're used to seeing, right? It's those signs that go over the express lanes that you may see in the Bay Area, the pricing information, but then it's also like a lot of algorithms and data to calculate that, right? To monitor in real time how much traffic there is in the general purpose lanes, how much of those are using the express lanes, and how we should adjust the toll depending. The back office, right, is if you have a transponder, you got it from a back office. If you've ever gotten one of these toll evasion notices in the mail because you didn't have a transponder, that also came from a back office. And then if you've ever called anybody to deal with either of those issues, get one or turn a toll evasion notice into a transponder, that's who you're talking to. They're also, of course, processing all of the financial transactions and transmitting the money back to the tolling authority. Okay, so that's the basics of what's happening with a toll project. Now kind of zooming out big picture to how we see tolling working in this region over time. This map is from SACOG's 2025 blueprint, which if all goes well, will get adopted next month. You don't need to memorize this, but basically what this fancy map shows you, which you can find in the blueprint document, is that the bulk of the highways in our region will have express lanes in some fashion 20 years from now. Right. So while we're focused on delivering Yolo 80 right now, we've been very mindful at SACOG and at CARTA about thinking about this bigger regional picture, this multi-county network, and how all of us will use these facilities together. Right. In this region, if you live in Placer, you're just as likely to travel on Yolo 80 to visit your family in the Bay Area or make a recreational trip up to Tahoe. Right. These are all our shared facilities. So we've been thinking collectively about how this network really works together and how we can build a regional backbone for it, even though we're only delivering one project right now. I'll also flag that SACOG's long-range vision includes dual and single-lane facilities. This is really trying to deal with the massive growth that we also expect to see over 20 years, right? Most of these, especially urban parts of our highways, are really right-of-way constrained. They're hemmed in with sound walls and development right on either side. And so we need to start looking at how we can manage the existing assets that we already have, including our carpool lanes and our general purpose lanes in the long-range vision. There are 3 projects in development. Just want to flag those for you all. I'm going to focus on Yolo 80 since it's the farthest along and the one you're going to see first, but I think it's good to know who else is in the pipeline after that. So right, high level, I'll get into some more details. The Yolo 80 project is led by Caltrans and Yolo Transportation District. It's currently under construction. You've probably experienced some 55-hour closures. You can talk to D3 about that. And that right now, the next major milestone is that we're looking to collect our first toll in 2028. So we're really in this kind of multi-year hustle to get ready to open it to all of you that summer. The next project in the pipeline is the SAC 5 Managed Lanes project, which is from the river at the county border through past the airport and downtown on I-5. It's being led by Caltrans. It's currently in environmental. We're expecting a draft environmental document mid next year. And so that project is looking at a whole range of alternatives, different types of price facilities, different numbers of toll lanes from different extents and phasing, but really just trying to get at that bottleneck that a lot of us experience coming in and out of downtown on I-5. And then the third project is the State Route 65 Express Toll Lanes, or ETL. This project is originally a carpool lane project that PCTPA has had in their vision for a long time to support congestion on Highway 65. And they're currently working through environmental revalidation to look at a toll facility from, just the southern extent of 65. So that's just a one-way facility that they're looking at right now. So although these are kind of, three disconnected projects at some of the worst bottlenecks in our region, what I'm trying to show you with this big map is that ultimately this will be a connected network. And so we're thinking also with District 3 a lot about direct connectors for the engineers in the room and some of these other facilities to make it really seamless to get from one toll lane to the other. Okay, some details about Yolo 80. This is where the project is located. It's between Davis and West Sacramento on Interstate 80. So you'll see here that the entire environmentally cleared project is shown in green, which includes the kind of 80 fork and a little larger section in the westbound direction. But the part that we're building right now that's funded is the orange piece in the middle, which covers the causeway and a couple of the interchanges on either side. If this is your first time in Sacramento, you'll know that this corridor is the main connection between the Bay Area and our region, right? So although this is a huge traffic issue for us and for the Yolo County communities in particular, this is also really a major interregional connection point. And 89%, as you can see here, it depends on which data source you use, but the number is very high of trips on Yolo 80 start and end outside of Yolo County. So although it's very important for those adjacent communities to have a say and understand and get that support, it's also really shared asset between all of us that we need to have congestion benefits on. What this map shows you is if Yolo 80 is closed for an accident or because it's so bottlenecked that you can't really get through it, how much longer in time and in miles you would have to drive to get around it, right? And that's because there's a floodplain called the Yolo bypass that runs underneath the causeway, which restricts the amount of parallel options that you can have to get kind of east to west between our region. This is a cool graphic that I like that looks at the lanes on Interstate 80 and how that relates to how much hourly congestion the facility has. Again, I'm not telling you something you don't already know, but there's a bottleneck here, right? We have a small number of lanes just over the causeway, and therefore that portion of Interstate 80 experiences the vast majority of the congestion on Interstate 80. And that's because of the existing bridge deck, right? This has been a long needed improvement in this region to be able to use that asset, but make better use of it through tolling. The congestion starts very early, it goes for very long, and there are lots of fatalities as a result, right? From those rear ends, folks who are kind of cruising along across Solano and suddenly get to Davis and have to slam on their brakes when all those lanes drop. In addition to causing congestion for passenger vehicles, there's also a huge transit issue, right? It's the only connection between Davis and West Sacramento for transit as well. So 84 buses a day run on the Yolo 80 causeway, and they're stuck in the exact same traffic that the rest of us are. This makes it really hard to improve transit frequency or transit reliability and start to move that mode shift, right? So when we see things like a 0.18% mode shift of transit on this corridor, it's not surprising because we can't really make upgrades to the existing bus system without having better reliability over the causeway. And so for all these reasons, what we're doing is we're adding a toll lane in the existing right-of-way on the causeway. So you have 3 free lanes right now, or you did before we started construction, and you'll maintain those same 3 free lanes. And we're going to add a 4th lane on the inside, which will be tolled. If you leave with nothing else from this presentation, I want you to leave with the understanding that even if you never pay this toll and you never use this lane, you will have 46% better travel time reliability in the free lane. Us adding tolling, even if you do not like the concept and aren't interested, is a benefit to all users of this corridor. But should you have a great need, you're running late, you're trying to get to the airport, you're running late for daycare, you're going to get charged, you have a very high need trip, you're looking at 80% better travel time reliability if you pay that toll. It's been a very interesting project schedule on Yolo 80. So it was in environmental analysis and design for quite a long time. Ultimately received an $86 million infra grant in 2021, which really accelerated a lot of the delivery of this project, right? We had a money with a clock and we need to figure out what we were doing. And so sort of swift time frame here in these early 2020s, we've been working through making a tolling authority, finishing environmental, getting approval from the state to toll, developing all the toll policy to implement. And that's been a really compressed couple of years here from 2023. And the focus kind of looking ahead is all about implementing those two parts of the toll system that I explained to you, that roadside system and that back office, and getting them tested so that when we open in summer of 2028, we have a lot of confidence that the system will work perfectly and you all won't experience any issues. Okay, last section here before we get to Q&A is on CARTA and toll policy. So I've been talking a lot about CARTA. Here is what it is. The Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority is a separate legal and financial entity. It's a new agency that we made. It's a joint powers agency. You can see from this kind of concentric circles diagram that there are current voting members and then there are non-voting members that include the counties that don't have express lanes right now, but we expect to have them in the future as the toll system grows. And so the board will also grow. So, there's a one at-large seat for SACOG, one at-large seat for Caltrans, which we're the first in the state to have Caltrans fully at the table. It's something I'm very proud of. And then you get 3 voting seats per county that's in the system. So right now we're a 5-member board with those 3 seats from Yolo. But someday when either SAC 5 managed lanes or Placer 65 ETL gets to that point, or both, then each of those counties will also get 3 seats. And the board will kind of grow over time to have that balanced representation of where the toll system is. So CARTA meets separately. I know I'm a SACOG employee and I currently staff CARTA. It's hiring its own executive director next year. So it's sort of flying the nest here. And so if you're interested in following this work in more detail, we have, board meetings, separate procurements, all that information, and I'm happy to connect you to that. I'm going to give you really the Cliff Notes version, but I want to be clear that the CARTA board went through a very detailed toll policy decision-making process this year, where they took a series of information items and then action items with a lot of detail on each of these topics. So if I mention anything that's very interesting to you, or you want to see a recording or a presentation, we have all the homework on all of these toll policy issues. Okay, so some key toll policies for you to take away. So basic lane operations, you have to have a valid fast track account to use the lane. So if the reason for that is that that's the highest accuracy and the lowest administrative cost kind of transaction we can have, right? If I have to take a picture of your license plate and get a hold of the DMV and send you a letter to your registered address, but that's your registration from 2 years ago and you've moved, right? It's much harder for us to collect that revenue. So just requiring folks to have those valid fast tracks and trying to get that percentage as high as we can is a big part of this work. So as we get closer to opening Yolo 80, you'll see a lot of public education around trying to get people to have fast track accounts, to get those transponders in their car. Hopefully you won't be able to miss us so that it's really easy for you to be ready to go. The lane will operate 24/7. I think this is really important for Yolo 80, but will also be important for other corridors, given the kind of seasonality of the traffic on Yolo 80, right? The first day that there's a big snowfall, we have all of this Bay Area traffic that comes up. It starts early, it goes late. And so trying to have a restricted traditional carpool hours window wouldn't really work for the operational needs of Yolo 80. This doesn't necessarily mean we're going to charge tolls in the middle of the night. If it's 1 a.m., and no one's there, then we can tick into something that's called, non-operational mode. You may see it if you've been in the Bay Area at night, it says, open to all on the sign. So we'll have the similar functionality here. The prices are going to change dynamically depending on demand. So this means that there's not going to be a set price every day. At 9 a.m., it's not always going to be the same price on Yolo 80. It will depend on how many cars are out there. And this is to maintain 45-mile-an-hour speed in the toll lane as required by FHWA, but also as desired by all of us for operations. Over time, that will level out a little bit, and CARTA will be able to advertise, typical toll rates on a Tuesday morning and a Thursday afternoon. But we all also understand that, when the A's are playing or some other extraordinary thing is going on, that we want to be able to alter that price to be able to manage that traffic. On the back office and enforcement side, so that second half of the toll equation, the back office, CARTA made the decision early on not to build its own back office, but instead to leverage an existing back office. The board just voted last week for that back office to be Toll Corridor Agencies, which is a tolling authority based in Orange County. So what that means is that if you've never used the Bay Area system, you're not an existing fast track customer, and you sign up to be a customer for CARTA, that will be who will process your transactions for you. You won't really know that. That'll just be where your transponder comes in the mail, but that's all part of the kind of behind the curtains magic of CARTA. We'll still have, an in-person walk-in center. There'll be places you can pay in cash in this region, and there'll be full interoperability with the existing Bay Area folks. But it's just the better partner for CARTA at this point. CHP will enforce moving violations in CARTA's lane. I think this makes sense, but it's good to remind you. So if you're speeding or you're crossing double white lines, that's still CHP's territory, still their highway. So watch out. But CARTA will enforce toll penalties. So for example, if you use the lane without a fast track, that's CARTA's job to enforce. CHP doesn't pull you over for not having a fast track. But we would send you a notice in the mail that says, hey, you didn't have a fast track, you used our lane. Here's what your toll was, and here's a penalty on top of that. If it's your first time getting that, then we can waive the penalty and say, would you like a fast track instead of waive? We want you to be a good customer. We want you to have a good experience, but we also don't want you to be a real burden on the system, right? To constantly be a license plate customer and a repeat offender on making penalties because it bogs up the system and costs a lot of money. And so CARTA will be really customer centered, right? So like I said, able to waive penalties when needed for kind of honest mistakes. Okay, that's it. Happy to take any questions folks have or have a little discussion. Thanks for having me. What do you think? Yes, when you ask questions, sorry, please use your mic so the folks online can hear you. Yes.
For the I-80 project, you didn't mention carpool. A lot of the managed lanes say, it's like a 2 or 3 people in the car, then it's free. Would that be implemented?
Yeah, you're right. I should have had that in the presentation. So it'll be 3+ is free. So if you're 1 or 2, you pay the full toll. If you're 3 or more, it'll be free. Good question. Yeah, Celia.
I'm curious, you would mention that 89% of the traffic on Yolo 80 is not from Yolo County.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing the education on this, how do you get to those areas outside, particularly in the eastern areas? The Bay Area is kind of used to this, but from the north, south, and east might not be. How do you educate them?
Yeah, I think first we have a humility of what we learn from other tolling authorities, which is that the number one way you're going to educate people on how to use your facility is they're going to use it wrong the first time. So making sure that letter that they get in the mail is really kind and thoughtful and explains here's how to get in the system and be a good customer. So being very thoughtful about that. But also that's really why we made it regional from the start, so that our Sac County partners, our El Dorado County partners, and our Placer County partners are at the same table with us and able to engage in those conversations and help us develop a public education plan that can reach everybody and kind of put the same information out. Yeah.
I have a question. So I have noticed that some of them are says 3 or more free, right? But it still is a fast track lane. And again, from my experience, I did get a violation because I was from here, we are at the San Francisco, that area where there was a same thing, fast track. We were 5 of us in there, but we got the penalty. We paid it, no problem, because we don't go every day. So there was no point to getting the transponder. But there is a confusion because some places you get the free, regardless you have transport or not, like out of state people comes or wherever. There are places where you must have transponder. So how you really educate which area really need a transponder or not? Because it says here, fast track, 2 or more, you get a discounted. If you are 1 or more, you basically kind of like that. And then 3 or more, it's a free. But the caveat is you do have to have transponder.
That's right. Yeah. So it'll be the same on CARTA. So if you've never done this before, you'll need to get a different type of transponder that's called a switchable transponder. And so it'll have a little tab on it that you set to declare how many people are in your car. And you'll need to set that before you start driving and use the lane in order to get the free toll. You can't just have 3 people in the car because we don't look into cars. We just read transponders and we take pictures of license plates. That's the way we can operate the system. I will say the tolling industry at large is really kind of thinking about how we can modernize the system from this switchable transponder. So Riverside County is working on roadside occupancy detection, which is basically a way to be able to using, I don't know whether they're using infrared or cameras or what they're using, but to be able to like see if how many people are in the car and correct the toll if they said there were three and maybe there was not three people in the car, which I think we see a lot of in our carpool lanes here in the Sacramento region. And then there's also a type of self-declaration that uses apps. So you sort of log into an app that's associated with your license plate, and then you either speak into it, everyone in the car speaks into it, and AI or whatever can tell that it's three different voices, or you take a selfie and it shows that there's three. So this is sort of like evolving. We're not going to have this on CARTA from day one, most likely. But this is something we're trying to understand, right? Because what we want to make sure is that people who are telling the truth and who are being honest and paying their tolls aren't unfairly burdened with the people who can afford to take the risk and pay the $500 ticket, right? Because that's a huge equity issue when we think about implementing on our toll lanes. So we're trying to work on it, but also seeing how the industry evolves. Yeah.
So you mentioned that basically if you don't have a transponder, right, then you will basically send them an invoice. The question I have is, have you thought about just operating under license plate only? I know that then there's the 3+ issue, but anybody who would want to get the discount, they would have a transponder, but then basically being there, instead of getting a transponder in general, they could just have their license plate.
We did think about it. So it is when the Bay Area got rid of cash tolling, I bet a lot of you who don't have transponders or accounts, that's what happens to you now. You just drive over the bridge and you get a notice in the mail. So that's pay by plate or post pay. It's also, there's a couple of facilities in Southern California that have it. So it's relatively common in the toll system. It is a more expensive transaction because someone has to look at the photos, validate. AI can do some of it. And then there's also the issue of looking you up with your address from the DMV, because not all of us update our address with the DMV as often as we should. And so that can be, creates additional loss and leakage in the system where we're not getting toll revenue. So ultimately, we decided to require fast tracks. We want to try to get everybody onto that cheap and efficient way of us processing these transactions, but we're going to collect both. We know when we open, there's going to be a lot of people who don't have transponders, and we're going to have to work with them, but we want to incentivize people to get on the cheaper, more efficient way of transactions.
Just out of curiosity, does CARTA know what the range of dynamic pricing might look like at this point?
CARTA does not.
Okay.
And I'll never tell you. No, we'll probably have a minimum toll, right? Which will be something like what it would take us to process the toll anyway, to make it worth our time to go through all the steps and the data all around to all the parties. So they'll establish that. And if there's not demand below that number, right, we'll tick into that non-operational mode. And then the idea is that there'll be what's called a soft operational cap, which means that we'll set a price at which the system can't tick over that dollar amount by itself, but that a person could manually ticket over that amount. But it's just sort of putting an extra roadblock in place to make sure that the pricing isn't going above some very high threshold unexpectedly without a person who understands traffic operations looking at the lanes, seeing what's going on and understanding like, okay, a big rig has jackknifed and actually doesn't make sense for us to have a $60 toll. What makes sense is for us to open the lane to all so we can help clear that big rig out, right? You need eyes on at this point. So that's generally how the pricing will work. Any questions online? Good question. No? Okay. Yeah. Hey.
You mentioned that Caltrans is part of the CARTA. What advantages does that give CARTA versus the other agencies within the state?
Sure. I think as the owner and operator of the state highway system, they're an integral part. And I'm talking to a bunch of people who work on Caltrans oversight projects, right? You guys know what this means. What I've seen as the real advantage is that we're having the conversation in public with everybody at the same table, right? What often happens, and I work on a lot of other different types of transportation projects, is that I have a conversation with all my electeds and we all feel like we understand what's going on and we have a plan and a vision. And then we go talk to Caltrans and they have data and a perspective as the owner operator that puts constraints or they want to go in a different direction. And there's this negotiation that you have to do between the two rooms and between the two sets of folks. And instead, we have built this table where everybody comes and has the conversation together. And what I'm most proud of is that we have it in public, right? We have it in a Brown Act compliant setting where anyone can come and listen to how, as a region, we're trying to figure this out together with our District 3 partners. And so I have, a ton of gratitude for District 3. They don't normally serve on boards and aren't normally operating this fashion. And so it's been a big growth, but I think there's a ton of benefits to CARTA from just being able, like an example is, we had a conversation around continuous versus closed or limited access, which is basically when you stripe the toll lane from the free lane, or if you put delineators or you put a barrier. Obviously, if you put a barrier, then you can't really have people getting out halfway because there's a barrier. But if you stripe it, then you deal with this kind of leakage problem of potentially people driving around your toll points. Please don't do that. And so we had this conversation around, well, there's, what's our shoulder width in this area and how hard would it be for a Caltrans maintenance vehicle to be able to get out there? And especially if we have delineators, how are we going to pick up delineators that get picked off? And I just think there was a richness to the discussion with my elected officials that there wouldn't be if Caltrans wasn't at our table. Yeah.
I hear concern just in the general public when just out there talking to people about an equity issue. And you had mentioned in a slide earlier on about how the tolling system impacts or it will help everyone, whether you're in the toll lane or not. Can you talk a little bit more about the methodology that you used to get there and just kind of the thought and the conversation around that?
Sure. So I think first I'll say CARTA is kicking off a regional toll equity study, RFP coming out in early November, if you're interested, to really look at this in a lot of detail and not just to look at it for Yolo 80, but to think about it regionally, about that big network that I think we're going to build and to understand what are kind of our universal equity concerns and what are maybe corridor specific concerns depending on their travel patterns, right? If it's mostly discretionary interregional trips versus that's how you get from your grocery store or to work every day, right? That's a different user profile and that's a different inequity potential. So that's the kind of analysis that we're going to be doing to get even better on the topic of tolling equity and adopt some measures prior to opening Yolo 80. So, in late 2027, I'll be able to have a much richer conversation with you about how we're handling this. But what I'll say is from the start is really thinking about equity at every stage, right? And so it starts with thinking about, well, how equitable is the existing highway system? And leaving conditions as is, what's the inequity of that? I didn't put the slide in, but the average income of a Causeway driver is like more than double the average income of some of the adjacent communities in West Sacramento. And so how do you think about the impact of that congestion and that pollution on those neighboring communities? How do we think about transit dependent riders and them being stuck in the same congestion versus having a toll lane that buses use for free and being able to get much more reliable, potentially more frequent transit by having a toll lane? And then of course you have the issue of the toll itself, right? And how do we think about how do we make that equitable? I think, at least for me, one of the complicating factors is that low-income people have a very high value of time. When you're working 2 jobs and you can't afford to pay a daycare penalty for being late, you have a very high value of time, also very good at calculating the value of their time. And so to me, having this option for everyone is really valuable. We need to be smart about it. We need to figure out how to make it fair. But I sort of bristle at sometimes the premise in the conversation that tolling in and of itself is fundamentally inequitable. I don't think so. I think uncontrolled congestion has a lot of really inequitable qualities to it.
You mentioned early on that, depending on the facility, whether it is, high performing, low performing, it will have high income or low income. Can you dive deeper a little bit more on what CARTA and, the agencies are basically going to plan on using the excess toll revenue for?
Sure. So this was a very big conversation last week at the CARTA board. So we're still figuring this out on Yolo 80. State law requires that the revenue be invested in the corridor. So it's not as if we can just send it any old place. So there are some restrictions there, but there's a lot to be decided on what within the corridor CARTA would like to spend that money on. So ultimately, CARTA will adopt an expenditure plan that either says this is the list of projects that we want to use excess toll revenue for, or what some tolling authorities do is they have basically like a funding round. And so they say, we're going to put this money in a pot, and every 3 years, we're going to select projects according to this criteria. There was also a VMT mitigation strategy as part of Yolo 80. So some improvements in transit and fares and sort of other different measures were originally part of that mitigation package. And the first couple of years of that is funded by the Yolo 80 project. And so there's a strong desire by the CARTA board to be able to continue some of those efforts. So I think those will show up in the expenditure plan, but it's really a question of when and how. Because we're also making this new agency that doesn't have reserves, and someone could crash into our toll point and we could have to replace it. And if you don't have your infrastructure to generate your revenue, then you don't have revenue and you can't. You see where I'm going? So it's a hard conversation that we're working through right now, is like, how conservative do we want to be, and how much do we want to balance our desire to be able to put this toll revenue back out in the community with our desire to run a really financially sustainable agency and have like a well-maintained operating lane. Okay. If that's all, thank you. Oh, hi, online. Yeah, please.
Hi, Kathleen. I had you mentioned earlier in your presentation that the express lane facility will be accessed by transit. What other types of transit tolling exemptions were you considering for this facility?
Sure. So the facility is for 2-axle vehicles only. So freight trucks will not be able to use the lane. That's California Street Highways Code. But buses will be free, emergency vehicles will be free, vehicles maintaining the toll system will be free. And then we're also doing 100% discount, or basically making it free, for motorcycles. And that's because you can do lane splitting in California. We would have to spend a lot of money on the infrastructure to be able to accurately detect motorcycles who are lane splitting between the toll lane and the general purpose lane without accidentally capturing any transponders that may happen to be in the adjacent general purpose lane. There's just not enough motorcycles for us to be really that worried about that. So it's really just a kind of a common sense discount that we have. There's like blood vehicles. There's like, we're following state law, whatever the other vehicles are. Other questions? Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, like when you're getting into the lane or making that decision to get into that lane, is there anything that tells you what you might be charged at that time? Does it tell you?
Yeah. So the signs will start in advance of that decision point for you, and they'll tell you, to Childs, this is how much it's going to cost, to US 50, this is how much it's going to cost. So you'll be able to make that decision. And again, I know it sounds scary that I can't say it's going to be $5 on Wednesdays, but over time, this is how many of the lanes work. And over time, you start to understand what a common toll is. And then you can also make that decision if it's very high. What we also see is a lot of folks choosing to still use the lane because the very high price signals there's a lot of congestion in the general purpose lane. And so if I'm running late, it may be even more valuable for me to use the lane. So CARTA will publish common toll rates, but we'll all also as a community get like tuned to what we think is a typical toll rate for it to be. Okay. Thank you again.